Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking absolute world-class technique. Now, this comes from a young gentleman that has joined the lifting zone called Tamati. Now, Tamati is only 12 years old, and the technique that I'm about to show you now will probably make your eyes water at how good it is. This lad is doing all the right things and is going to go a very long way in CrossFit, no doubt. But what I wanted to do today is take a look at young Tamati's technique and see some of the lessons that we can draw from this young youth lifter. It's very different coaching youth athlete versus someone that is over the age of, say, 18 years old, because generally when I work with athletes over the age of 18 years old, they're not limited by their strength. They don't get to use their strength because their technique and their mobility is shocking. However, it's very different when working with a youth athlete. I started at 11 years old myself. You have great mobility, you have great ability to pick up new skill and direction and technique, but strength can sometimes be a limiting factor. But you have to play a very careful game with not overloading an athlete too young and really putting the emphasis on technique and good movement pattern and giving them time to develop confidence in being consistent with a good technique. And that's exactly what we've been doing with Tamati. That's exactly why his technique is as good as it is. But I want to talk through a few key points, things that we're working on, why his technique's so good, and also some of the key things that we're focusing on that you may not be able to see to the blind eye. So sit tight, get some popcorn, and let's dive into this analysis. Let's just talk about setup position first of all. Now, this was the first video that Tamati sent to me when he first signed up at the lifting zone. Couple of things I want you to take into consideration with youth lifters or athletes that are going to grow is that their start position and their positioning is going to change as their body changes. As they start to get taller and taller, that grip will need to slowly move wider, and equally as they start to get taller, their feet will also need to move wide. Now, Tamati did start at a young age, but this is going to be something that we're going to be able to have to keep an eye on to ensure that he's always well proportioned in the setup position. I would say at the moment for his size, the foot positioning and everything is great. What I love about this is that we'll see a few things here that I'll point out. Eyes are looking straight ahead at the start. This helps him keep his chest up. You got to remember, wherever you're looking has a direct relation to where your chest is pointing. If you look up at the sky, naturally the chest picks up. If you look down at the floor, naturally the chest will follow suit as well. It's very hard to do one without the other. So in terms of where the knees and arms are in relation to each other, this is something I look at with a lot of athletes. When we're in the setup position, we're trying to make sure that the knees and arms are in line. Having the knees and arms in line allows us to maintain a very consistent angle of the back at the start here, which we see, which will ultimately allow us to utilize the legs, big strong muscles, in the first phase of the pull. I spoke to my coaches about this the other day. Something that we look at as a good general rule of thumb in the setup position is where your hips are in relation to your knees in the setup position. Naturally, people will argue with shorter femurs that the hips will start a little bit lower than people with longer femurs. I don't like to overcomplicate things too much, because how are we to know whether our femurs are long or short in comparison to others? Just overcomplicates it. But if you think it's a good general rule of thumb, if your hips are just very slightly above the knees in the setup, great. But above anything else, what we're looking for when we start to push away is that from the line that we have when we're in our set position here from the start, we want to have exactly the same position really when the bar gets to knee height. This just goes to show then that you've utilized the legs really well in the first phase of the lift and you've let the big muscles do the work. I always find this much easier to get youth lifters to do than lifters that are over the age of 18, because they're trying to use this muscles, which only get you so far when you're snatching. One thing that you'll notice, which we've been working on a little bit with Tamati, is, again, this was his first video that he sent me through, is you'll notice that the toes do pick up a little bit in this first phase of the lift. When the weights or toes picking up at this point, what this generally tells me is a weight potentially shifting a little bit into the heels and that balance could be worked on a little bit. I like to see the foot staying nice and still when we're pushing away through this middle phase from the lift. Just allow that there's not any movement backwards or forwards during the extension phase of the lift, as this can cause an issue with bar displacement, which is something that we're going to actually touch on in a minute here. So as we come through to this middle phase of the lift, you'll see this small gap then starting to get created. And now we're working heavily from weight shifting from heel to toe during this extension phase. Now this causes us to get onto the toes a little bit early in this position before extension, and the shoulders now to sit very slightly back behind the bar during this crucial phase of the lift. A couple of things if you're thinking, I do that too, Sonny. A couple of things that you can do in the setup is turn the toes out a little bit more. We noticed in the setup position the toes were quite straight, so that would definitely help during this middle phase to stay a little bit more balanced. But ultimately, to think about keeping the shoulders above the bar through the middle phase of the lift is also going to help too, as well as keeping the weight through the flats of the feet, like I said, so we're pushing down through this part of the foot to avoid any displacement back or forth as we pass the knee. Coming into extension, again, a lot of us would say at this point, wow, I wish my top position looked like this. This is very, very good top position. However, there's a couple of things with me being super critical that we've been working on over the last few weeks. It's just getting better extension at the knee here, and then also when we're extending at the hip, making sure that the bar is staying in contact with the body. If the bar has left the body before the legs have hit extension, which you can kind of see here, we're kind of relying now on upper body a little bit to move underneath the bar, and we're not maximally utilizing the legs as well as we could during this middle phase of lift. So things that I would do to help is something like hang snatch above the knee or dead pulls. Now dead pulls is an amazing exercise. Essentially I'm working on standing up onto my toes and getting the bar to meet the hips without the arms moving at all. So we're just purely focusing on leg extension. Once you've mastered the leg extension like this, you can then start adding in the movement that happens after leg extension, which is shrug here as we move underneath the bar. But one thing you'll notice is this huge gap that's now been created. We've come now through from the floor, we've gone heel to toe, so we've maybe caused a little bit of transfer of weight in this direction. And then as we've hit extension, the bar started to move away. This doesn't cost him the lift at all. It has plenty of time to get into the receive position. But again, as we start to move to submaximal weights, this distance between him and the bar is going to cause an issue. The closer we can keep the bar to the body through extension, even better we're going to be able to move into the receive. One cue that I talk about a lot in getting someone to do this, simple things, backs of the hands to the wall in front of you, thinking about picking the t-shirt up. So I want to see the t-shirt getting picked up here on the way through the middle, or keeping elbows higher than the hands. And there's a drill that I like to do when you stand against the wall and just practice keeping elbows higher than the hands and turning through. They can start to ingrain that feeling that during extension, the hands can't move in that direction. They must stay in the pockets and keep moving up. Final thing that I want to touch on here before we go where we're at now, 6 to 8 weeks into training, is just as we're going into the receive position, the feet don't move very much. Now this is a young youth athlete, but this is, in my opinion, I'd say a lot of tightness there in the hips that we're seeing, because we're seeing the knees collapse in a little bit and the hips aren't obviously sitting very low. So one thing that I'd like to work on here is adding in a little bit of mobility work, not loads, but a little bit of mobility work to the adductors and in the hips, so that we can start getting the feet moving a little bit wider into the catch position, which is ultimately going to allow us to sit a little bit deeper in the bottom. That's a couple of the things that we looked at in the initial analysis. Like I said, this is a very, very good lift, and if I play this through for you now, you're going to be like, wow, I wish my technique looked like that, and I don't blame you, it's amazing. But there's still things that we can work on to help Tamati in the most important years of his career, going from 12 into 18, develop in the right way. Especially as he gets older, he's naturally going to get stronger and he's going to want to use that strength. If he's got the good technique nailed in now, he's going to be able to, and that's really what myself and the rest of his team are trying to do. This is a recent hang video that I saw on his Instagram from one of his training sessions that he's done recently, and there's some amazing things that I saw when this popped up. You can see now how good he is loading the legs through this middle phase of the lift. We saw previously we were getting a lot of gap happening at this point when the bar was coming through the middle. You can see that he's working on that with his hang work, which is why this bar's staying lovely and close. Like I said before, we were struggling with the shoulder position with him staying over the bar. You can see now through this middle phase how much better his body position is here now as he's coming into extension. He's staying over the bar. You can see him transferring into his toes a little bit later. And above anything else, what we'll now see is that his arms are staying nice and straight as his legs are extending. And you'll agree there's better knee extension, better ankle extension, and even better hip extension now than there was just 6 to 8 weeks ago, which is incredible. You'll also notice in addition to this how much closer the bar is staying to the body after impact. Reducing this gap to this sort of distance now through the middle is meaning that he can move a lot more efficiently into the receiving position. But not only that, the final thing that I want to touch on that we've worked on was the foot movement. keeping the feet moving now and the knees staying out in this bottom position is getting him to the point where he can now sit the hips below the knees in the bottom position and achieve a really solid catch. Tamati, you've done absolutely amazing here, really listening to all the cues, making some amazing progress. And I think it just goes to show that even when your technique is what you may think good, there's always good things to work on. And if you are working with a youth athlete or you're a youth athlete yourself, under 18, investing time and energy into mastering the technique now will be super beneficial for you in the long run. And equally, if you're an adult over the age of 18 years old watching this video and you're thinking, damn, I wish I had technique like that. If you spent time dropping the weight back down to 35 kilos and spent 6 to 8 weeks just ingraining technique like we're doing with Tamati, after that process, when you've really got the technique down, we then let you put your strength back on, so you can load the plates back on. You'll be able to stick to a good technique when it gets heavy. And sometimes you need to see that from a youth 12-year-old lad lifting to understand that you need to put your strength to one side for a minute, focus on the technique. 6 to 8 weeks, you can see this kind of improvement, and then you're going to actually be able to utilize that strength that you have. Ultimately, this is going to reduce the risk of you getting injured later in life, which is something that we've got to be super cautious of when you're getting involved in Olympic weightlifting. Mastering this sport correctly will give you a lot of longevity, good range of motion, a lot of happiness later in life if you can master this sport well. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's technique review. Of course, I will continue to do lots more of these with my clients. If you do want to join the Lifting Zones team, start working with myself and a team of Olympian coaches from around the world to level up your Olympic weightlifting, then hit the link below this video. You can book in a discovery call with me. We can have a chat through your lifting. I can let you know how I can support you. Big love, guys. Don't forget, like, share, and subscribe. Trying to grow this channel.